Welcome to this live stream marking the launch of my adaptation of Dante's Inferno, which is called Hell Unearthed, and also celebrating the 700th anniversary of Dante's death. I'm joined by Santi Macharo, the chair of the Dante Society London, and we're going to take you right to the middle of Dante's hell to meet the monster Geryon. We'll talk about the nature of sins in this part of hell, how my book has been adapted from the original. Have I actually started to record this? Let me double check. It is recording, yeah. And also to talk about its relevance to audiences today. I'll do my best to answer any questions at the end. So I'm just admitting people as they come in. So hi, everybody. Our travellers, Dante and Virgil, have circled round the sins of self-indulgence like lust, anger, and greed. They've crossed a muddy swamp. They've been attacked by furies at the entrance to lower hell, and they've been exposed to the torments of violent souls who suffer under raining fire, chased by hellhounds in barren woods, and submerged in boiling blood. They arrived at the edge of the 8th circle, and the stench is so vile that Virgil suggests they hold on a while to get accustomed to the environment. Dante, like the good student he is, wants to make the most of this time in their pause and asks Virgil to explain the layout of hell and how it all fits together. This is like an interlude before the final horrors of hell begin. Dante and Virgil are perched on the edge of the well that is the remaining section of hell. This is where the fraudulent souls are punished. The drop is so enormous that they can't walk down, and so they have to find another way. Little known to Dante, Virgil is making plans for them to be transported down by a monster. The monster's name is Geryon. Virgil asks Dante to give him the rope tied around his waist, and Virgil coils it up into a ball and throws it over the edge to try to lure the animal up to them. We get a graphic description of a silent monster swimming up from the depths, and the suspense intensifies as he takes ages to arrive. When he finally emerges where the pair are standing, Dante is surprised to see the face of a handsome young man, quite a charmer, but the rest of his body is barely submerged in the water, and he notices the hairy armpits of a beast, and even worse, the pointed tail of a reptile which oozes poison, lying in wait to attack its prey. Geryon's body is the most colourful thing in the whole of hell. It is more intricately conceived than the bright silks dyed in the East, and this colour serves to emphasize the deceit and fraud that lies behind the surface, which is dark, threatening, and evil. Geryon actually reminds me of, I think some of you may be based in the US, but in the UK, we have just had a court hearing today of a police officer who attacked a girl called Sarah Everard in the recent months. And he, for me, is exactly what Geryon represents for us in terms of someone who has used the guise of his position, in this case a police officer, to attack a girl by luring her into his car on the pretext that she was breaking the law of isolation during COVID and shouldn't have been out. handcuffed her and basically raped and murdered her. And it's just come through today, but this is exactly what Geryon is. He is the face of someone who is showing a total, he's trying to lure people in with his false pretenses, and actually is just horribly evil underneath. And I'm afraid to say there are many people like that amongst us today, but it's a really strong visual for us all, and is so relevant today. Dante is going to give you an extract in Italian from the moment Geryon appears. This is from Canto 17. Over to you.
Of course, Italian, of course. So, I have to close my eyes to be able to recite that by heart. Ecco la fiera. Ecco la fiera con la coda aguzza che muove i monti e rompe i muri e l'armi. Ecco colei che tutto il mondo appuzza. Sì cominciò lo mio duca a parlarmi e accennolle che venisse a proda vicino al fin di passeggiati marmi, e quella sozza immagine di Froda sen venne. E arrivò la testa e il busto, ma sulla riva non trasse la coda. La faccia sua era faccia d'uom giusto, tanto benigna avea di fuor la pelle, e d'un serpente tutto l'altro fusto. 2 branche avea pilose in sin l'ascelle, lo dosso e il petto e ambe 2 le coste, dipinti avea di nodi e di rotelle. Thank you.
Bravo, Santi. Sono molto impressionata. Isn't that amazing to be able to do that by heart? Wow, well done. So I just want to show you the book cover. I hope you can see that. This is the cover of Hell Unearthed. And on the back of the cover, there is, you see this all right? I hope you can. This is the a picture of Geryon. This is obviously a modern interpretation. And over the years, we have had some amazing illustrations of the Divine Comedy by William Blake and by Salvador Dali. And just this weekend, I discovered another illustrator called the Batten illustrations, made in the 1930s. And a series of these illustrations had been given to Lady Margaret Hall, a college in Oxford University. And they've been sitting up until this time in the college library and haven't had the ability to be taken out into the, to the general public until just now. So if you want to check out the Batten illustrations, there might be something new, but they are really quite enchanting. I have collaborated with a wonderful illustrator called Rob Page, who loves history and mythology. And I chose the illustration of Geryon for the back cover of my book because I wanted the colour to contrast with the shadows of hell. And all the other illustrations in my book are drawn in black and white ink. So for example, this one is Dante and Virgil at the gates of hell. So abandon hope, all you who enter here, those famous words. And I wanted to show you a picture of Cerberus, the 3-headed dog, whose job it is to be guardian of the greedy. And in my adaptation, the greedy also includes those who are addicted to either drugs or alcohol, for a more modern take on that category of sin. On the front cover, I sought the copyright. Hey, can you see this all right? You can see. I sought a photograph of David Bowie with a statue of Dante up, which conveys for me a neat fusion of old and modern worlds for this modernized version of Inferno. And last year, Bowie's Books, the book that came out, which basically explores the list of 100 books that Bowie recommended that we should read before we die. And on this 100 books was Inferno. So he was a keen advocate of Dante, which is lovely. I think there's a question. It's great to see the questions coming up on the chat, by the way, and I will certainly get to them once I've stopped talking, unless Santi can answer them for me. We'll see. We'll work on it. Don't worry, we'll work on it together.
We have the question in your chat. It's
in my chat, is it? Just on mine, yeah. You should see it on yours as well. The name of the illustrations at Oxford. Yes, okay. So I'll write it in here if the sound isn't perfect, but they are the Batten illustrations.
I have a question for you, if it's possible.
Okay, I haven't finished yet, though. Do you want to answer my questions now, or I'm just going to talk about it? Okay, thanks. So my adaptation seeks to open up Dante to a wider audience, many of whom might never come across Dante in their lives. It introduces more modern sins and sinners, which are relatable to people today, but you still get the Dante experience as the book remains faithful to the original. So, for example, Dante used flatterers, witches, and sowers of discord in his circle of fraud, which don't really chime with us these days. Instead, I have introduced kidnappers, paedophiles, child groomers, money launderers, and human traffickers. These are crimes we hear about on a daily basis. The fundamental motivation for both Dante's and my choice of sins in the circle of fraud is deceit. Crimes are committed where people try to earn a vulnerable person's trust and then exploit it for their own advantage. Dante's themes are so relevant today. At its heart, the Divine Comedy examines free will and the choices individuals, societies, and institutions make. Politicians and figures of authority get plenty of airtime in Dante's Hell, and nothing much has changed. Let's take a moment to think about our own politicians and the real motivation for some of their decisions. Are decisions taken or pledges made for the good of society or for self-promotion? And
in English or Italian politicians?
I think you'll find politicians across the world are equally at fault for trying to do things to improve their own powerful position. How many of our political leaders chose not to comply with the law over social distancing and isolation? Are political decisions made around climate change, Afghanistan, Trump's Mexican wall, the levelling up agenda, the vaccination rollout, kids' education, are they all made in good faith or to please the electorate and hold on to power? What motivates people who commit domestic violence, who traffic humans or kidnap children? All of these things bring about a breakdown in society, and that is something Dante wanted to put right. Dante shows sinners who are familiar to him and his medieval Tuscan world, like the notorious thief Vanni Fucci from Bologna, or Guido da Montefeltro, the Ghibelline leader who conspired with Pope Boniface to overcome the Pope's rebel opponents. I have chosen a range of sinners from both the real world and fiction, trying to avoid a catalogue of cliched criminals, but also to appeal to a broad audience. For example, you will find Bonnie and Clyde, Arsène Lupin, Jimmy Savile, Al Capone, Osama bin Laden, you won't be surprised, Mussolini, Mugabe, and Mao. I have also included Black Mamba from the film Kill Bill and Tyler Durden from the film Fight Club. Some of my sinners are in fact heroes of history, like Horatio Nelson, Elvis Presley, or Catherine the Great, because like Dante, I want to show that what we perceive as human greatness in life isn't necessarily perceived in the same way by God. He will give justice to any wrong done in life, even if fellow humans have overlooked them or turned a blind eye. Nelson cheated on his wife, Elvis fell prey to addiction, and Catherine the Great cheated on her husband and ultimately staged a coup, which allowed her to take the throne of Russia from her husband. Lady Diana is also on the fringes of hell. Despite her care and attention to worthwhile charities during her life, she was arguably drawn to cheat on her husband, as he had cheated on her, due to pressures of her position and the institution of the monarchy. Diego Maradona was a World Cup winning footballer, but again, pressured by societal expectations, and we have seen lots of athletes pressured in this way, he succumbed to drug taking to enhance his performance. I want to show that people across geographical, cultural, and religious divides can be guilty of the same human failings. Recognition of the universality of sin should be a unifying process, and that was certainly also Dante's intention with Inferno. I'm going to hand over to Santi, who I think has some questions. Sorry to not allow you to ask them earlier.
Yes, the Divine Comedy, of course. No, I'm sorry, the microphone.
So the Divine Comedy was written in verses in poetry. We want to know whether your book is written in poetry or in prose.
Okay, so the book is written in prose, and the reason for that is obviously it's incredibly hard to pull off writing in poetry, and in particular to try to mimic la terza rima that Dante used. There are very few people that do this really well, and there's no point in doing something if you're not going to do it well. So I wanted to write in prose. Another reason for that is my main motivation with this adaptation is to open up the work of Dante to people who've never come across it before, and to new audiences and to young adults as well. So in order to make it as accessible as possible, I felt that prose was the right vehicle for that. It's not by any means a perfect vehicle, because it doesn't replicate the beauty of Dante's language, but I hope that it serves the purpose that I want it to. And I would also say that I'm currently working on an audiobook of Hell Unearthed, which will include some music actually to pepper the different parts of hell, and to give you a sense of what that really feels like. And so the bit of the lyricism I lose from writing in prose, I hope to regain through the audiobook.
Could I just ask a follow-up question?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Yeah, first of all, yeah, thanks for the talk. Sorry I was a little bit late. Interesting stuff. Just on writing in kind of, I guess, a more sort of like accessible style, do you use any kind of like modern slang or more kind of vulgar language, similar to the way that Dante would use the Vulgate, so that, you know, non-Latin readers could access it as well as educated people?
That's a really good question.
John, we're here.
Hi, Santi.
Hi.
All right, lovely. So you know where we are.
Yeah.
The answer to that is no. There's no street language in there, and I considered that, but decided that I didn't want to use language which would outdate too quickly, and so I needed to err on the classical English side. Otherwise, in 5 years' time, it wouldn't have the same appeal. So I think you have to be quite careful. So I talked to various people about using banter. I don't think it would have had such a long life, and I had to be careful about that. So it is quite, but it's accessible. It's a very easy read. Yeah, but it hasn't got any street language in it. No.
No, I mean, it's always difficult not to date it, especially if you're using kind of contemporary, you know, popular figures as well. So yeah. I guess from the language side, you want to kind of make it a little bit more longer lasting.
Yes. The other thing that links into that question is that one of the key criteria for my characters was that they were all deceased. And so I'm talking about, I guess the most recent character in there is Bernie Madoff, who is the financial criminal who died just recently. But he is the most recent person, and I guess they're dying in their mid-80s. So, you know, you're not going to have too much updated language on account of that.
No, okay, fantastic, thanks.
Thanks for the question. Any other questions?
In case,
someone?
No.
Okay, I wanted to ask, could you explain the reason Dante had murder, ranking less badly in hell than thieves and liars?
Thank you, Santi. Okay, this is one of the things that I struggle with most when I look at the Divine Comedy today. He obviously used an Aristotelian structure for the Divine Comedy, and it is totally unacceptable to us today that murderers should be treated less badly than someone who has thieved or lied. But in order to understand where Dante came from, we have to know that in medieval times, believing this Aristotelian structure, the hierarchy of hell depended entirely on reason. And reason is a God-given gift to humanity, and it's what differentiates us from animals. So as you go down through to the depths of hell, we have people who are effectively perverting their God-given gift of the intelligence more and more. So at the top of hell, you have the sins of self-indulgence, which are lust and anger and greed. And we see those as sins of human weakness, where you're not really using your intelligence. It is just you fit your human innate weakness is leading you to commit those sins. And then the violent souls, which we think ought to be right at the bottom of hell, really, they are, in Aristotelian theme, they are committing bestial crime. Their behavior is very much like animals. They're not really using their intelligence to commit their crime. And as you go down further through hell, you have fraudulent and the traitors who are clearly using all their powers of manipulation in order to harm other people. And that's why they're lower down in hell. It's all about reason, which is interesting in itself, because I think that means that, that it shows how Dante isn't, although he's set in a religious book, this is a journey which takes place over the Easter weekend, after all. And it's a process of going down into the depths to look at yourself and go through to purgatory and salvation. But actually, there's quite a lot of stuff in there which is not at all religious. And this moral code that he's following, and along the lines of using human reason, is not terribly religious, but it's a really interesting map of the world that he's invented. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
If there are any other questions, please do either chat or come forward.
Okay, in the meantime, can I ask what happens after hell?
After hell, well, let's hope that not everybody.
I know that the souls in the hell can't go to the purgatory.
Yeah.
It's the problem.
Yes, the souls in hell, unfortunately, they live their death without hope. Exactly. Well, in the Divine Comedy, the travelers, Dante and Virgil, after hell, they obviously go up through purgatory and on to paradise. And for them, or for Dante, it is a process of introspection. It is looking at himself to understand where his weaknesses are, and to recognize in other people's sins his own, and to go through a process of purgatory, repentance, I suppose, in the religious sense, and then ending up with salvation. But you're right, the souls live in perpetual lack of hope, although they are hopeful. I think a lot of the souls, aren't they? They're well, not hopeful, but they're very sad. They often reflect on their previous life on earth, and certainly want to use Dante to relay messages back to the world of the living. So there's a lot of, so Dante is a link between these souls in hell and earth. But he, for himself anyway, manages to make the journey right up to divine divinity, but not for the soul, sadly, in hell. No, that's true.
Just on that topic, if you were to write kind of, I guess, a sequel about purgatory and Paradiso, who would you see from kind of the last 100, 200 years in different areas?
I haven't thought about that yet. That would be certainly the next stage if I was going to go on to write the next two books in a modern setting. But it would be, it's funny because when I first started this work, it was much more of a modern translation that I did. That was my first draft. And then I was encouraged to move further away from the text in order to have hooks to get people in. So, and at first I was slightly unsure whether I wanted to bastardize the original work in this way, but it became quite fun. And as I got other people who didn't know Dante before to read it, they were clearly baited by the hooks that I was putting out there, and were much more engaged. So I think it is the right thing to do to get a wider modern audience, which is, after all, what Dante wanted to do by, as you said, writing in the vernacular. So I haven't yet decided, but it is quite a fun process. And I'd feel more generous by putting in characters into either purgatory or paradise than I do into hell.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that'd be such a challenge, because it's, in all the way since it was published, Inferno is by far the most popular, and people relate to it much more, and it's much easier to think of people to put into hell than it is to think of people to put into sort of the lower levels of paradise, at least.
You're absolutely right. But now you've given me a challenge. I'm going to rise to it.
Excellent.
But to reassure the listener, Dante won't fall to the hell. Dante will be in the purgatory, among the clouds.
You say in English?
The
clouds, the
Oh, the proud. Yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't say that Dante is I mean, he was also proud, but also I think he could have been a bit of an intellectual snob, I think. And despite the fact he wanted his work to be accessed by everybody, I think he definitely was, in the way that he didn't want any of the newcomers to come to Florence. We'd call those the bourgeoisie, I suppose, now, but he didn't want them to come in to dilute the beauty and nobility of Florence. So I think he was quite an intellectual snob, so I'm not quite sure where that puts him.
With the hypocrites.
So shall I don't want to be comment cutter. We're actually okay for time. Any other? Yeah.
If they don't have any questions.
Good. Are there any other questions from the audience?
I've got a slightly random link. I mean, firstly, congratulations on the book. My understanding is that Dante felt that he was describing real experience in a kind of mystical realm. But the question is, someone yesterday was pitching me to read the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, which I hadn't heard of. I've just looked at. But apparently that is really encouraging us to face death and recognize that what we do here on Earth echoes in some way through time. Was that part of the intention of either your book or the Divine Comedy? It's a slightly random question, but I'm interested in your comments, Hilary.
100%, yes, definitely. I think Dante wanted to show everybody the source of Florentine life, and by extension, Italy. in order to make us, I think probably from a humanistic point of view, more than religious even, to make us aware of the harm that we can do one another, and the consequences. And he really wanted us to see how we should work together and not against each other. So he was really anti, and at his time, of course, there were a lot of division. There were divisions between at the political level. So at his time, and I don't want to bore you if you already know, so stop me if you do, but in medieval Italy and Tuscany at the time, they had these two factions of the Ghibellines and the Guelphs, constantly at each other's throats, and neighboring cities were, you know, swapping whoever was in the ascendant from time to time. It would change all the time. And he was really saddened by this at the political level, but plenty of family feuds as well, just like the Montagues and the Capulets that we know from Romeo and Juliet. So all of this division, not least, you know, he was very upset with the interference of the Pope in spiritual, in temporal affairs. So the fact that the Pope wanted to maintain power over the politics of Italy. So all of these divisions, Dante very much wanted to draw a spotlight on, in order to encourage us as readers to work together, to help each other, to strengthen society. And in terms of, I guess, yes, that it is a religious sphere that he's put his Divine Comedy into. So we are encouraged to think about what might happen after we die as a result of our actions and our choices in life. And I think that's so powerful. It's so powerful then, but to us now, just to consider there is a consequence potentially to how we choose to live our lives.
Thank you.
That's a pleasure.
Oh, here again. Yes.
And can you explain how to get the book? And
Yes, so the book is available on Amazon, online, and on Goodreads as well, if you have access to Goodreads. And if any of you want to buy a signed copy, I'm very happy to, if you want to buy one, you can let me know on an email, which is celebratingdante@gmail.com.